Welcome to Ecologic for the end of May. It's a beautiful time of the year. It's getting warm. Summer's getting here. We have very fortunate to have with us Philip Gould, who's been a prominent photographer working in our area since the 70s for sure, because I got access to a series he did on the crawfishermen around Catahoula. A lot of people who are still around today, Roy Savoy, I guess Camille Blanchard,
all those people.
Ozair Bonas.
They're the same Ortonville to Catahoula highway there.
Yeah, right.
They're all on there.
They're all on there. Most of them are still crawfishing.
More power to them.
Yep. You know, Ozair, I think, raised 9 children. They all finished college.
Wow.
On a crawfish.
More power. That's amazing.
The people love the basin. They love being out there. You know, so Philip's been actively involved in the basin and the people that are in it. And we're fortunate to take him out to an area that we'd love to make into a national park, the Lake Fosse Pointe area. It's a part of the basin that the levee system bypassed. And they did that to reserve retention for the whole watershed from Alexandria down. And it's about a 200,000 acre retention area. It's 7 or 8 times larger than Cypress Island Point. The flood of 2016, that retention area processed about 800,000 surface acre feet of flood water. The Vermilion processed about 250,000. So
really important.
Very important to keep us from flooding. And you know, part of the problem with it is access to it has been interfered with dams and everything, and so hopefully that'll be revisited and the dams will be eliminated or holes will be placed into it so that the Lake Fosse Point system can better handle retention and keep our area from flooding.
I have a question for you. What is the body of water that flows into Lake Fosse Point? Is there one?
It's Bayou Ami,
Okay.
and indirectly Bayou Teche.
Comes off of Henderson?
Bayou Teche comes into it at Lorville.
Sure.
The Lorville, when they built the Keystone Dam, which is just upstream from Lorville, it drained the Teche. This was in 1913, to the point where 1913 we very much depended on water transportation. The railroads didn't go everywhere, and our roads were terrible. We didn't have bridges, and so water transportation was a mean commercial transportation for sugar, for cotton, for cattle, for timber, all the things we needed.
Wow.
And the Teche dried up, and so to keep the boats afloat, they built the Lorville Canal, and now that's the main connection between the Bayou Teche and the Lake Fosse Point system.
And it's actually a functioning canal. You can get
It's a functioning canal. It's got a gate on it, and when the water level gets above 4, the gate has to be opened. And so anyway, that's a very, very important part of our retention area for the whole Teche Vermilion watershed, which goes through, covers about 13 parishes, all the way of Rapides, of Oils, Evangeline, St. Landry, all those parishes, parts of Iberia, all of it drained through the Lake Fosse Point system. and so besides being very important for our floodways, it's also an area that was not destroyed by all the dredging that occurred within the levee system.
Okay.
The dredging of the main channel, which was a humongous project, started in 1958 and went for 4.5 years.
That's the Atchafalaya River.
The Atchafalaya River. They dredged the Atchafalaya River. The original dredging of the river was 50 by 300. And the Corps decided with the 54 Flood Control Act, we had to pass 1.5 million cubic feet per second of water down to Atchafalaya So the river had to be enlarged to accommodate that. Well,
Wow.
to do that, they dredged a 100,000-foot channel, 1,000 foot wide, 100 feet deep.
Wow.
It took 28 dredges working night and day for 4.5 years, billions of cubic yards, and it was dumped into the adjoining swamp.
Wow.
So it literally filled the swamp,
Silted up.
silted up, yeah, with hydraulic dredge spoil. Now, hydraulic spoil is 20% solid and 80% liquid.
Right.
It's about like a milkshake,
Okay.
so it could flow everywhere. And
Right.
it flowed and just destroyed the swamp and the trees that were in it. And that didn't occur on the Lake Falls Point side. It's the way it was 1,000 years ago.
Saved by exclusion.
Yes, and for some reason, I guess the lack of bridges, lack of roads, the area has from Catahoula to Sharonton, there's not one person living in that area. That's actually in the swamp. There's some living along the levee, but that's
Sure.
on the levee. But in the actual swamp area, there's not one inhabitant.
Wow.
There's very few canals. There's only a couple of pipeline crossings for some reason. The pipelines bypass that area, and so it's very
Look up there.
pristine.
That's you.
Yeah, very pristine, like it was,
Way back when.
Well, we aged 10 trees in there, and we'll see later some of the photographs of the trees. And 5 of them were over 1,500 years old, and one of
Yikes.
them was over 1,800 years old. And so, as you put through there, you're going under the same trees that the Indians paddled their dugouts under.
Wow.
That's something to think about,
Wow.
And that's the importance of trying to preserve it. There are areas of the basin over on the east side that were very similar, that property owners, claimants, whoever, dredged canals and with spoil from the dredge, raised it and put lots, and wiped out the trees and just wiped out the whole area.
Wow.
Here we've seen some of the photographs.
Yeah. There you're trying to catch something.
Yeah, fishing was not real good.
We got a whole lot more than fish, though. That's a good thing.
You want me to go faster? Or
Sure, you can make it go faster. That's fine.
Yeah, it's an area that has numerous archaeological sites. Most of the archaeological sites on the inside have been covered up with spoil and have been totally destroyed or removed.
Right.
But on this side, they're pretty much intact. And with a couple of archaeologists from the archaeological board, I spent an afternoon at 2 of the sites, and the goal was to see if we could find pottery, because pottery kind of ages a site. If they get the pottery, they can age the pottery. And generally, the thicker the pottery is, the older it is. As the technology got better, the pots got smaller, thinner.
Right.
They learned to powder clamp shells and mix that with the clay and make a pot that didn't leak, and it was much thinner.
Wow. Okay.
But that took them about 3,000 years to figure that out, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. But if you can find a pottery, you can pretty much, locate where the clay that made the pot came from.
Mm-hmm.
And these archaeologists have these soil manuals, and they'll have colored clays all over the Mississippi tributary, Missouri, and Illinois, you name it. And you clean the pottery real well, and there's a hole next to the colored clay that may come from Missouri, and you stick it in the hole and match it.
Wow.
And it tells you where that pot, the clay from that pot came from.
Really, they could.
So they can
Be
track
that
the
specific
traveling,
about it.
yeah.
Wow.
So, but there are areas in Lake Falls Point that has pottery,
Okay.
and so, but the 2 sites, so pottery goes back 3,900 years, So these two sites that we spent a lot of time trying to find pottery are older than 3,900 years.
Wow.
It's not switching now.
So, we look at the trees in here. I mean, it's phenomenal, the beauty of this area, the cypress knees. And there are several types of, the tupelo is there with the cypress, and then you have the large red or ball cypress,
Right.
and then you have the small lake cypresses. They look like they're about a fourth the size of the big tall trees.
And that's different subspecies.
Different subspecies, and University of Mississippi wanted to place them on the endangered list, and after they took a canoe trip through there, they realized that they're so plentiful in this system that we didn't
Right.
didn't need to try to declare them endangered.
Endangered everywhere but in this spot.
But this area,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's neat. Some of these trees are in 5 or 6 feet of water, and so if you would lose them, you could never replace them. You
Right.
could never plant trees in 5 feet of water. And evidently,
How do the water
they
just lower like
started-
that?
they started during long periods of drought,
Right.
where the
right.
whole system went down for years.
Yeah,
And these ancient trees, they can go back and gather weather data. There's a tree in Catahoula that's 2,400 years old.
wow,
And from those, this is up in North Louisiana, from the borings, they can look at long periods of drought. And this goes back 500 years before Christ.
yeah,
And so
thinner
they could
lines,
see, yeah,
yeah,
much thinner lines,
yeah,
much closer lines, very, very slow growing than those stress periods, And so this is worth preserving, it's a unique area that the flood and navigation of the basin bypassed it.
So I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
You have the Lake Fosse Pointe State Park there,
Yes.
and so why not just include all this into the
Lake
state
Fosse
park?
Pointe would be, of course, the preservation from a national forest is much, a national forest gives it a much higher level of protection, so to speak,
Okay,
and it gives it national attention. People would come to it to absorb to view all of this.
mhm,
And so you have, like Yellowstone, you have a constituency. You
Right.
don't think of Yellowstone as being something for Wyoming.
it's not a state
It's a
park.
national, that's right. This is a
National
national treasure.
phenomenon, yeah,
And that part of the basin is the Yellowstone of the South.
okay,
This is a treasure for the nation, it's not just a treasure for Louisiana and
Right.
St. Mary Parish and Iberia Parish and so forth. It would be a rich historical site, archaeological site. The surrounds, are, there's Indian community, the Tittamook Indians are there, at Chariton, Louisiana. They have a rich heritage in that area. The Civil War was fought in that area, very much a part of it. The basin was very much a part of the Civil War. There's a road from Catahoula to Butte La Rose across the Lake Fosse Pointe region, and it was declared a bad road. But
wow,
it was, they could travel, I guess, horseback and wagon to Butte La Rose to that fort.
is that the road that we have now, or is
No,
it further south?
No, it's totally been lost.
In St. Martinville, Catahoula too.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. And it went from St. Martinville, Catahoula, and then Catahoula across the edge of the swamp, so to speak,
wow,
But parts of the road came from the Lowerville area, and there was a very important ferry crossing right in that region, in the north end of Lake Fosse Pointe.
right,
the area in the north end gets towards Lake Dotrieve, and the connection between Lake Dotrieve and Lake Fosse Point is called Sandy Cove.
I've heard about that.
And the Sandy Cove was an area where Canada geese came by the thousands to get their sand on the sandbars. They need the grit to digest their food, and they would come there by the thousands. People would be there hunting. And the north end of Lake Fosse Point and Lake Dotrieve were areas where they had extensive shrimping. And they shrimp by with a seine. They
Okay.
didn't use trawler, they used a seine.
Sure.
And I interviewed one of the old timers, this has been 40 years ago, and he was in his late 80s. So this was about 1980. And so he was involved as a kid seining in Lake Fosse Point, Lake Dotrieve for shrimp
Wow.
before they had trawlers. And he said they were right around Sandy Cove where Lake Fosse Point, Lake Dotrieve come together. And they got a 500-foot seine. And
That's huge.
Yeah, bunch of guys, and they bring it in. They just setting it out, and they get 3 tarpon in it. And the tarpon are caught in the net.
Wow.
And he said that was the biggest commotion, and finally they jumped out.
The people, not the tarpon.
The tarpon. Yeah,
Oh, they did?
The tarpon jumped out.
Right.
So
Yikes.
this was a fantastic area for wildlife, and it still is.
I was intrigued by how pristine everything was out there. I mean, it just like it seemed totally untouched.
Totally
No
untouched,
sign
yeah.
of any human beings,
No,
or
No.
no sign of any decay or any, the only trees that were in any kind of bad shape were ones that were hit by storm or lightning.
lightning, and a lot of them are all beat up and busted up, but they're still growing. Phenomenal, you know.
Well, what doesn't kill you?
I was out on a rainy, windy day, and a squall came through and hit one of those trees. And
With your boat?
the lightning went down the tree. I was about a half a mile away, but it exploded the tree,
Wow.
and it caused a fire. These trees are hollow,
Right.
and it caused a fire from in the hollow.
Wow.
And it just blew. It kind of exploded into fire immediately. It was really something to see.
That's amazing. That much
Now,
power.
we drove by it, I don't know if you took a picture, we drove by it, it knocked it into the water, so remnants of it are still there. So anyway, there was a film crew that did a bunch of filming, and they were from France, and they had an ultralight seaplane, and they did a bunch of photographing in Lake Fosse Point, Lake Dotrieve area, and also in the Weeks Island area, in that swamp, But they had just been in Brazil, they had
Wow.
been in Africa, and they go around the world filming in these pristine sites. And their comment about Lake Fosse Point is one of the most beautiful spots on earth.
Wow.
And this is a film crew that goes all over the world looking at these sites.
So we need to keep it that way.
Hopefully, we hope to keep that.
How do you see yourself, the process of getting from point A to point B?
It involves 3 parishes, and I guess the next step is to gain support from the parishes
Sure.
to see if they would support it, and have a great economic impact on St. Mary, from Franklin, Jeanneret, New Iberia,
Visitors? and-
St. Martinville. Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, visitors come, and this is an area that is roadless, and it should continue to be roadless. But, they're easy to put in canoe and kayak trails, to put, people in boats that would visit and travel through the area. You can see maybe little walking trails along the edge,
Right, right.
but you wouldn't want to, tear down the swamp to build a road.
They did that on the other side, right?
They did that on the other side, yeah.
And you can access everything from the other side too, from the levee.
The other side, you can drive all over it, yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, and they put roads in, and they just mowed down the trees to put the roads in, and then they they have a road go along a bayou and somebody puts a canal and puts the dirt on the side and destroys all the trees along the bayou, so.
Right,
And then, of course, the area is very subject to flooding and,
right.
we think the Corps of Engineers preserve it wetlands, but I mean, these people somehow get permits to destroy some of the most pristine wetlands we have in the whole state of Louisiana.
I didn't know the Corps is, when I say the Corps of Engineers, engineer is the key word. They're there to build and solve problems and the whole
Yeah.
business.
Right, this area has been left out. The criteria for making up a national park is, one, it has to be in a natural system, it can't be controlled. So the whole levee, the levied-in area, that's about 700,000 or 800,000 acres, that's controlled with about 30 floodgates up at
Right.
the top. So it's
Mhm.
very controlled. 30-70 split,
You're talking about the old river control
Old river
structure?
control structure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but this side is tidal. I mean, there's no control to alter the water flowing into it hardly at all,
It's affected by the tides.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's not
And-
brackish though, is it?
Oh, yeah.
The
Oh,
water, like,
yeah.
Fosse Pointe is brackish?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, very
I
much.
never put
I
my
mean,
finger
you
on
have shrimp in it, you have flounder, redfish. You can go on some nights when the north wind blows and the tide is dropping real fast, the fishermen will go where it goes into the canal that drains into Bayou Teche. At that point, they come at night and the eel are migrating out, and they have little surface nets and headlights, and they catch the eel. And the
Wow.
eel they use for catfish bait.
Okay, so,
So the eel, it's kind of interesting, an eel, when they're 12 years old, they change color from a yellow, yellow bottom
mhm.
to a light green back. They
Wow.
change to a dark green back with a white bottom. And that triggers their migration all the way down to the middle Atlantic, where
Wow.
they lay their eggs and fertilize the eggs in the seaweed beds of the calm area of the mid-Atlantic.
Wow.
And then they return, the young return to the waters of their parents. And so the Lake Fosse Pointe system is completely open. So all that is taking place.
Well, I'm looking at the map, it looks like it flows down into Cypress Island, all this area here, and down out into, this canal here?
Yeah.
So that water goes up that canal, the tides go up that canal?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a long way.
It comes from the Charenton Canal, from West Côte Blanche Bay.
Sure,
It comes north up to historically it would come through the Bayou Teche, but they
Right.
dammed off the Bayou Teche.
okay,
So to vacate that water, they had to put a canal that drains it into Côte Blanche Bay. So that water backs up into Lake Fosse Pointe. Now, Lake Fosse Pointe is a prime spot for blue crab, and
okay,
it's freshwater crabs. So it's they're delicious, they're clean, and there's lots of them in there, and it kind of changes every year, sometimes more than others, and so. But so it is, the swamps around there are where juvenile shrimp come in.
Hmm.
So it produces, it's an estuarine system, produces shrimp, menhaden, juvenile trout, juvenile shrimp, all these critters out there in that enormous swamp bed around it. The lakes are about 28,000 acres of open water, but
Wow.
you have about 100,000 acres of swamp surrounding it.
sure,
And it's those swamps that are part of our estuarine system. Now, you see, that can't happen within the levees because those swamps are not available. I mean, they've been closed with pipelines and with fill and, you know,
Right,
the Lake Fosse Point system is all still natural.
wow,
And you see all the birds, if you go to the other side, you can go 50 miles and not see a bird. But on this side, you're constantly looking at osprey and eagles and egrets and, you know,
wow.
constantly looking at birds because there's food there for them. No,
Why not?
yeah.
They go where the
Yeah,
food, you
they
don't
go
go to
where
a
the food
restaurant
is.
that doesn't have any
It's a
food.
tidal system, you know,
Right, right,
and there was,
wow,
in around 1905, 1906, there were a couple of small canals put in that were to drain the swamps.
Right.
And so typically canals that serve pipelines, they didn't put drains in them. But the
Right.
whole idea was to use the canals to drain the swamp. So
Right.
everywhere there's drains in it. And so that allows it to function and allow for critters to come in and out. And
wow,
it helped, it really helped access. So it's amazing, you know, I've seen people shrimping in there. And, and amazing, and they'll use seines to catch fish in there. And they'll catch all these catfish, the garfish, the brim, saccale, bass, all the menhaden, all the different species of menhaden that are normally caught offshore. That's all caught in Lake Fosse Point.
wow,
And
Huh.
and so it's a habitat that's much richer in life than the waters on the other side.
interesting, because they've been left alone.
They've been left alone, right? The, the, the swamps are still connected to the tidal exchange.
Does the Atchafalaya Basin have a national standing of some sort, or like is it a national reserve or anything like that?
But the best thing you could call it, that it has considered a heritage area.
Okay,
And I was involved in setting that up, and
that's the best they could get.
the idea, I've driven to Alaska a bunch of times, and the guide up there is a book they call the Milepost. And the Milepost will tell you everything you see on the Alcan Highway, or in the Kazan Highway, all the highways that go into the area of British Columbia, you know, the Yukon, Northwest Territories. You drive with the Milepost.
Wow,
And it tells you everything you're looking at, you know, that, you know, filling station, who owns it, if they serve pie and everything, all the details, that graveyard, when it was put in, and, you know, what church cared for it and so forth. But
right.
it's a wonderful book that tells us, so we got the idea, we need a milepost around the basin.
A what?
A milepost booklet
Okay,
that.
you're looking at this, you're
would
looking at
drive
that.
and route around the basin, and which we plotted out, you know, and it's about 310 miles. And we started in St. Martinville, driving east toward Morgan City, up all the way to Old River, and back all the way down, you know,
Wow.
following as close as you could to the Atchafalaya River.
Wow,
And
this is all on boat,
No, this is all by car.
so you're on the levees a lot, and,
Levees and whatever, mostly on hard surface roads, you know, all of it on
Okay.
hard surface roads. And it's kind of interesting, you know, it would tell you like where the boat landings are.
mm-hmm,
St. Mary Parish has 29 boat landings. Now, there's not one map you could get to look at where these boat landings are. And the boat
Right.
landings are, if you want to, you know, you come from Michigan, you want to put a canoe in the water, you need to put it in one landing and take it out another. But you
right,
can't get a map to tell you if you're from Michigan where they are. So the milepost would identify all those places.
some people, we don't need to share
Right.
that information,
It's kind of
we know where everything
interesting.
is.
Father Crumley tracked it, and he was real excited about helping. He was a priest in Charrington, and he had a TV program like this one. And so Crumley goes and he sees these big old mounds around Pierre Park. And so he found the oldest people around, and, you know, are those Indian mounds? No, that's the sawdust from sawing the cypress.
Wow,
The mounds are 20 to 30 feet high with oak trees growing on them. and that was the sawdust piles from sawing
And
cypress.
the sawdust turned into some
Into
form of soil.
Some form of soil, and oak trees grew on them, and
Wow.
so there's a fantastic history that you would gain by driving through it. So we put this in the legislature, got it passed, got it funded, and we got it funded. They hired a public relations firm out of Pennsylvania to work.
Who's they?
The board that was set up to run the Atchafalaya milepost program.
Okay,
They drove the route and said it was boring, that we're not gonna do that. We're gonna make it into a heritage area.
visually boring or
And
geographically boring, yeah.
then you see these around heritage area, what does that mean, you know, I mean, if you're a tourist, you just can't get a map that'll show you how it is to drive around the basin. To go to these, like, you know, along at the basin, going up the road, the Atchafalaya and the Mississippi get very close together.
Right,
And there's some old churches that go back way before the Civil War.
right,
And those would be identified, you know.
sure.
The old river control structure is the largest riverine control structure on Earth. No?
Saying a lot.
So, yeah, and so the milepost would tell you all about it, you know. And as you drive through it, tell you what each set of gates do, when they operate, how they operate.
Wow.
And they all operate according to law. There's not a colonel in New Orleans that determines what to do in controlling that system. That's all set up in the 54 Flood Control Act, you know. Anyway, those things, sugarcane might be boring to someone who, I guess, doesn't think much of agriculture.
Right,
But you're from Minnesota, you might want to know that sugarcane is very important, you know, to the world economy. Louisiana plays a major role. We're the biggest producer of sugar in the U.S. There's only 2 states producing sugar now, it's Florida
sure.
and Louisiana. Hawaii's totally out of it.
Really?
Yeah, so we only 2 states left doing it. So, and Florida has not been able to increase their yield per acre.
Interesting.
And, you know, our yield is kind of interesting. In the last 10 years, our yield has gone from about 4,000 pounds per acre per year to almost 10,000 pounds. And Florida is at 3,000 pounds. Florida has a little more acreage, but far less yield. Our yield is much
Have they figured out why?
I don't know. No. Well, one of the things is that Florida has a real problem. They have to irrigate.
Yeah, who'd have thunk that?
And they drained
All
the
that
swamp.
water?
They drained the swamp to blow the cane, and that affected rainfall. And our rainfall has not been altered by draining the swamp. We have not drained the swamp to plant sugarcane. We've planted on the old Mississippi riverine levees across the bottom of the state. So anyway.
So they never drained land? They never
No,
plant sugarcane?
No, wherever they tried that, it didn't work,
Okay.
and for whatever reason.
So all those slots of land off the river going all the way back into the swamp, they go to a certain point, and after that,
Yeah.
there is
The
no
farmer
point to do it.
realized wherever there were palmettos, that you should never plant sugarcane. So if there was
Interesting.
palmettos, they didn't clear the land, because that was subject to flooding.
Palmettos is
And the
a,
old timers knew, yeah, the palmettos was a telltale plant, because palmettos grow between a high and low water mark.
right,
So if
right.
it's palmettos, it's gonna flood. And so the old time Louisiana farmers could figure that out.
Wow, wow.
And so we have this fantastic area that we wanted to build this booklet, the Atchafalaya milepost, and maybe it's something that we still ought to do, you know. Each parish would tell you where the historical churches are, you know, the history of the churches, the graveyards, the boat landings, you know, the bed and breakfast, you know, the
Sure.
restaurants. That's what the
They don't have
milepost
that-
on the Alaska Road.
Don't they have that
Out.
along the Teche? Or,
We don't.
I know they have some sort of signage along the Teche.
They maybe They may have some,
Yeah,
but this would say go from St. Martin, the Teche went all the way to Patterson.
sure,
So it roughly follows the Teche,
right,
and then it would go down the east side of the river through Plaquemine, and then come up through, where the I-10 goes down at, Grosset.
sure,
Then it follows all
Raymond.
the way up, a bunch of engine miles on the road there, and it goes all the way up to Morganza. And then
Right.
from Morganza, it goes up the river, kind of the Atchafalaya and the Mississippi River, very close together, it goes between them.
right,
And then you go, then back through Simsport coming back, and, down towards Palmetto. And
Wow.
follow the road all the way back, and, it's a phenomenal drive, and, but tourists come and they would get a picture of the basin, the areas where the Irish thrive, where the granivoles thrive, fantastic plant areas, where these giant cypress trees are, where the giant oak trees are. And so it's to copy the Alaskan milepost that we tried to get done, and it got shoveled down a different road, But anyway, that's our hope to.
well, you
With the
said
Lake
gold,
Fosse Point, the boundaries of the park, and that you photographed so eloquently, the boundaries of the park would start at Catahoula, at the Catahoula Bridge, and the state owns in that area they call the Forks. It's big high hills in the basin, the only place where you have natural hills
in the basin
in the
itself,
basin. It goes to about 27, 28-foot elevation. So
significant,
the top of these things are big live oak trees, beautiful. And as you go down, the cypress and the tupelo. And it's an area natural, untouched, and the state owns about 700 acres. And it's where the state first wanted to put the state park. And it would have been much better there. So it would go from there, and it follows the waterways and the land that the state owns. Now, we're not gonna fight with people over land ownership. And if you claim land in a swamp area, we're hoping to set up a plan where you can donate the surface to the state for the park and maintain the minerals. Now, we think that's attractive to the landowners because you get the benefit of a donation for tax purposes.
no, the maintenance,
And all the maintenance, all the liability goes away, and then you keep the minerals forever.
and they drill from some point far, far
And-
away,
and, well, I mean, a lot of that land is owned people from all over the country.
right,
And so, that's one of the issues that would come up, who owns it, and, the law clearly says that subject to the reach of the highest water of the year, it belongs to the state. And the area we're talking about was part of a very, benchmark Supreme Court decision of 1919. And it declared that Lake Fosse Point, Lake Dotree were navigable, tidal, and as such was sovereignty lands of the state. The state could never sell it, and it was subject to its ownership to the ordinary high water mark. And
Wow.
so that case is already there, so any claims would have to come against that case.
right.
And
They emanate from there going forward.
that's right, yeah. So, but, we should, at best, we could avoid the litigation by saying, hey, if you claim it, give it to us, and, nobody litigates it, you get to keep the mineral.
Yeah,
And that's a win-win, I think, for everybody.
right,
But, it's hard to deal with, people who think that, they lose their land, they lose, they don't own, they claim in what they don't own. And that's true all over Louisiana, and part of that was, we lost the Civil War, and they gave those swamplands away.
the Yankees,
Well, the Louisiana legislature in 1880 set up Act 75, and paragraph 11 of that, one paragraph, about 200 words, set up the state land office whose duty was to sell state lands,
Oh,
including the marshlands, the swamplands, the woodlands, and the prairie lands.
okay,
In it, they set up a price. Swamplands and marshlands was 12.5 cents an acre,
okay,
$80 a square mile.
pretty good.
$2,200 per township, 35 square miles.
Wow. And so what was before the Civil
So
War?
you could invest $2,000, you can invest $10,000 and get, 4 townships. That would have been about 150 square miles, that's 22,000 acres per township. You would gain almost 100,000 acres for $10,000.
Not a bad deal, even back then. So the
Well,
question for you, before the Civil War, what was the law regarding all that?
That was all
The-
public areas,
All public
all
areas,
public,
state owned?
all owned by the state. All land subject to tidal flow or navigability belongs to the state. And the state got it when it became a state. It's called sovereignty land.
Right,
So all these marshlands, they sold for 12.5 cents an acre. Duck hunters from Minnesota and Michigan bought thousands of acres because they were getting it for nothing.
mhm.
And,
That's where you have these Louisiana land companies. and all
Louisiana
this.
land that was set up, that was a different deal. That was an unbelievable deal. Though, in the Act 75, they sold the woodlands of the state, the piney woods,
Mhm.
all the Northland of woods belongs to the state. They sold that for 25 cents an acre.
Okay,
And like one of the wood timber guys says, the revenue from this one log will pay for 35 square miles of these logs.
you can figure out the math from there. I mean, it's just-
I mean, it's Louisiana Pacific, a lot of Boise, there's a bunch of national lumber companies got their start here with that purchase.
Right,
The rangelands of southwest Louisiana, the prairies, that was sold for 25 cents an acre.
wow,
And people there was a bunch of investors came from Kentucky, into
Mhm.
Acadia, Jeff Davis, and bought humongous areas. And then they invited the Germans to come, and the Germans came and,
settled it.
yeah, I mean, that's how they
Right.
got here. In the 1880s, they got here, and they figured they could grow rice because the natural ponds over there had wild rice.
Mhm.
And that's how it got started, but they got the
Wow.
land for nothing. And so, but anyway, in 1890, they set up the Atchafalaya Levy Board, which was 16 parishes from the Bayou Teche to the Mississippi, down Bayou LaFourche, from Concordia to the Gulf.
It's a big
And-
territory.
And they gave all the state land, unlike all, to the levy board. They gave all the titles to the levy board, with the right to sell it and the right to buy more land. By 1900, in 10 years, the Secretary of State had transferred title to 3,600,000 acres.
Hmm,
Over 900,000 acres in Terrebonne Parish alone,
hmm,
around 400,000 in LaFourche Parish.
okay,
And the levy board sold that to 2 guys, Wisner and Dresser from Toledo, Ohio,
okay,
for a $20,000 down payment and a $100,000 5-year note without interest. They
Okay.
met the 5-year note by selling the area around Henderson to St. Martin Land Company, people from Chicago.
okay,
Bought 49,000 acres for $2 an acre. That's how they met the 100,000.
wow.
So,
Small piece off and pay off the whole,
and they were guaranteed title going forward from 1890 to any lands acquired by the state by any means.
Hmm.
So if the state acquired a right of way for a road, the minerals and title to the road went to the Atchafalaya Levy Board and to the people they sold it to. Unbelievable, and it was only contested in this area, Lake Fosse Pointe, Lake Dotrieve. It was contested in 1919. The governor of Louisiana in 1918 leased the land of Lake Dotrieve, Lake Ron, Lake Fosse Pointe, Port of Grand Lake to the oil companies to explore for oil and gas.
Okay.
And the levy board said, no, we sold that to Wisner and Dresden. So the levy board sued the Secretary of State, Capdeville, for title to those oil producing areas.
They win?
They lost.
Mhm.
And the Louisiana Supreme Court says the land is subject to tidal overflow and subject to navigation, and as such, it's sovereignty lands of the state. The state could never sell it.
They can't, even if they want to, they can't.
They
sell
can't,
it.
that's right. If they wanted to, they could.
So any
So,
sale
but
beforehand would be illegal.
It defined, it didn't go to the whole, it just defined the area that was leased by the governor.
Hmm.
It should have gone over the whole case. All the marshlands and the bayous that they claimed,
Right.
you know, should have been excluded, you know, and so if we had a governor that would study his history well, he could probably take it all back.
Okay. Well, Jeff Landry is a product of St. Martin Parish, and
Oh, yes.
he knows
yes.
all the ins and outs of the geography and everything. And
Yeah, I don't know where he would be on this. I would think that he's well supported by the big landowners.
right.
And the big landowners since, 1890s, they've run the state.
Hmm.
All these lands that they bought for almost nothing, they exempted it from taxation.
And you wonder why we're,
Give you an example, I looked at the tax records, David and I were looking at the tax records from Vermilion Parish. 118,000 acres of Exxon-owned lands of Vermilion Parish last year was taxed at $12,000. 118,000 acres. Half of that tax goes to the school board of Vermilion Parish. So on 118,000, you have $6,000 school board. It doesn't pay a janitor,
right. It's a joke.
It's a joke, absolute joke. Yeah, yeah. In the White Lake area, there's a agriculture company. They were selling fresh water to the farmers. They have 28,000 acres. Their tax last year was $2,000. 28,000 acres. So why are we the richest, poorest state in the nation? That's the fundamental why.
Yeah. It's
And
all
so-
rigged.
With our national park, we would hope to, preserve this area, make it available to our youngsters who desperately need to be brought into nature.
Yeah.
And we have so much to learn from nature, If you want to, get rid of depression, go fishing, But
It'll quiet your mind
right,
quick.
Right, quiet your mind real quick, yeah. But anyway, the importance of preserving that, this generation doesn't have a right to destroy it. We've destroyed enough.
Right.
We've destroyed Indian mounds. It's horrible how we've destroyed the mounds. I grew up when we were kids right after the war. We'd go play on the big Indian mounds where the Vermilion Bayou entered Vermilion Bay.
Wow.
They were pyramid mounds. There were 3 mounds. They were about 40, 50 feet high, all clamshells, kind of ran in a north-south direction. They were kind of lined up. The middle one was the biggest one, and the top of it was about a half an acre. And it did
That's
have
huge.
huge, humongous, huge. Yeah, 1949, the state sold them all. The barges came with their buckets and destroyed those mounds. In 1932, there was humongous mounds at White Lake. They called it the Square Mound. And near the Square Mound, there was a road that went, the Square Mound was about 200 feet, is perfectly square, with the diagonals going north, south, east, west,
Wow,
at 25-foot elevation, which is very high in the north, all clam shells.
right, wow.
And there was a shell company out of Lake Charles that got the contract to get that. And then north of that, about half a mile, there's a round mound. And they thought it was a ceremonial mound. Well, that was a burial mound. And it was about 30 feet high, and it was a couple of acres across the top. And as they were digging up thousands of skeletons. And one of the workers brought one of the skulls to the Abbeville Meridional. And it was obviously a young person, and all the dentures were in beautiful shape, and they marveled at it, and why'd you get this? Oh, they're dredging up, the mound, and it's a burial mound. So a couple of months later, the editor got Shell Morgan from Coast City to run him out there. You can only get that by boat. So they went out there, and he witnessed barges full of skeletons. At this time, this is 2 months later, but they've been doing this for months. But he's there, and he's estimated probably over 1,000 skeletons.
So it really was
And
a burial mound.
It was a burial mound.
Yeah.
And evidently the bones were well preserved in the shells,
Hmm.
and it wasn't in the moisture of mud, so to speak.
Right.
And they made the comment, the bones of the savages will serve to smooth the roads for our modern vehicles as well as the shells.
That's a quote.
That's a quote.
The bones of the savages.
The bones. Now, with those shells, there's another interesting part of the story. Those shells shelled the road from Intracoastal City to Perry, and then from Esther to Forked Island.
Wow.
And the kids that lived along that would find all kinds of artifacts along the road.
Right.
And old man Gooch had the restaurant in Abbeville, the Get restaurant, I think, in Abbeville, Mr. Gooch, he'd pay the kids 25 cents for a 5-gallon bucket of artifacts. And he had a garage full of it. And when he died, a few months later, somebody came and emptied the garage,
Just took it all.
took it all.
Darkham Night.
Get rid of the evidence. And then the people got really hacked about it and started tracking it down. And the story is all of the Mr. Gooch's artifacts from the roads on the big mounds at White Lake ended up off of one of the bayou bridges in Abbeville. They dumped them all overboard.
Somebody wanted that stuff
So,
to disappear.
you look at these places. Another one was the Alligator Mound.
Okay.
Now, Professor Kibbe here at UL was studying the Alligator Mound, working with archaeologists from Florida who were looking at the turtle mounds. The mounds built in the shape of a turtle. We had a mound built in the shape of an alligator. And they were comparing artifacts from the two. They used, now this mound was about 30 feet in elevation. And when Pecan Island was found, there were about 150 human skeletons on the top of it. That's in the history of the guy that found Pecan Island. He counted 150 skeletons on the top of the mound. They were not buried.
What does that signify?
And the alligator mound, I saw aerial pictures of it. It had tail, the legs, and it also, from the air, it looked just like an alligator. Had a warped tail, about 1,200 feet long, but 30 feet wide, about 40, 50 feet wide.
Wow.
And that's, they dug up about 90% of it. There's about 10% is still left. They dug up to build the Cornell Road.
30 seconds.
Anyway, Philip, thank you for being with us and
I enjoyed visiting.
with the history of our area. I think, you know, the National Park for Lake Fosse Point would be a way preserve some of that. There's a bunch of Indian mounds in the area that are pristine the way they was probably 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. They weren't destroyed as they were on the other side. So hopefully we can save it. And through your photography, we can show it to a lot of people and say, this is the beauty. And it's worth, I think it's incumbent of this generation to save it.
All right.
Thank
cool.
you again, Philip.
All right.